In 1959, a scientist started an experiment with wild foxes. And what happened just 4 years later changed our understanding of evolution forever. In 1959, something began on an ordinary fur farm that would later shake the entire scientific world. Incredibly but true, a scientist named Dmitry Belyaev launched an experiment with a group of wild silver foxes, and it led to results that amazed even the most experienced researchers. Officially, he just wanted to improve the quality of their fur. But behind this modest goal was a bold secret plan that few knew about: to recreate a process that took nature 15,000 years in just a few decades. The events of the next years challenged all the laws of biology we thought we understood. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning of this amazing story. At that time, doing such experiments was extremely dangerous. Scientists who studied genetics could face serious consequences, from losing their job to much worse. So Belyaev had to act carefully, hiding his real research behind a simple experiment to improve fur quality. The method he used was surprisingly simple. He would walk up to each fox's cage and try to offer food. What do you think happened? Most of the animals would hide in fear, growl, or show their teeth, but a few of them showed a little less fear. These were the ones the scientists chose for breeding. There was no training, no lessons, just their natural reactions to humans. Belyaev started with about 130 young foxes from fur farms. These animals were a bit calmer than truly wild foxes, but still very distrustful of people. The selection was very strict. Only the calmest ones could breed. No more than 5% of males and around 20% of females from the whole group. And so year after year, generation after generation, the scientist kept selecting. He didn't know what this would lead to, but he patiently continued the experiment. Every year, only the foxes that showed less fear of humans were chosen, and slowly changes began to appear. At first, the changes were very small. The foxes didn't run away as quickly when they saw people. Then some started to show curiosity and came closer to the cage bars. But that was just the beginning. By the third generation, the behavior changes were easier to see. The foxes didn't just tolerate humans. They began to show signs of interest. Some of them even allowed people to pet them. This kind of behavior was unthinkable for wild foxes. Then something happened that made the scientists hold their breath. By the fourth year of the experiment, around the fourth generation, strange things started to happen. The changes were not just in behavior. The foxes' bodies began to change too. By the sixth generation, the changes became even more amazing. Some of the pups started doing things no one had ever seen foxes do before. They whined to get human attention, wagged their tails when they saw people, and some even started making sounds that sounded like, but no, it seems unbelievable. Could wild foxes really start barking like dogs? Something happened that no one could have predicted, and that went against everything science believed at the time. Some of the pups began to show physical changes. Nature seemed to press a hidden button that started an ancient genetic program. In 1969, a special fox was born. The scientists even gave her a name, Mekta, which means dream. What was so special about this fox? She was the first pup with floppy ears, just like a puppy. And the scientists never selected foxes based on their looks, only their behavior. So where did these changes come from? That was only the beginning. Some of the pups started to have tails that curled like a loop, totally different from the straight, stiff tails of wild foxes. Others developed white spots on their fur, something never seen in wild foxes. When the experiment reached the 10th generation, the changes were so surprising that even experienced scientists couldn't hide their amazement. The pups now opened their eyes earlier than wild ones. They started reacting to sounds earlier and showed curiosity about the world sooner. Even the shape of their skulls started to change, from narrow and angular to rounder ones with shorter snouts, giving them almost a puppy-like appearance. But the most mysterious change was in their social development. Wild foxes have a very short time when they can bond with other creatures. In the experiment foxes, this period became much longer. Some adult foxes kept their playful, youthful behavior for life, something that never happens in the wild. Years passed, and the foxes continued to change. By the 15th generation, the scientists noticed something that seemed almost impossible. These foxes had started to understand people. No, they didn't speak human language, but they began to read our gestures and facial expressions with amazing accuracy. Imagine this. A fox watches where your eyes are looking to figure out what you're focused on. It follows your pointing hand to find hidden food. Some of them did this even better than chimpanzees, our closest relatives. It was as if they had developed a special kind of social intelligence made just for communicating with humans. By this time, the scientific world could no longer ignore the incredible results of the experiment. Belyaev had proven that complex genetic changes could happen much faster than anyone ever thought possible. But then, fate brought a serious challenge to the experiment. In the 1970s, an economic crisis hit, and funding for the research was suddenly cut. Belyaev had to make a hard decision. Which foxes should be kept? There simply wasn't enough money to care for all the animals. He chose to save only the friendliest foxes and those with the most unusual traits. Surprisingly, this crisis sped up the experiment in a completely unexpected way. Around that time, something amazing happened with one of the foxes. She began showing behavior that no one had ever seen before, and no one could have predicted. When she gave birth to her pups, do you know what she did? She started bringing them to the front of the cage to show them to the researchers, as if she wanted to introduce her babies to the people. Even many pet dogs don't do that. It seemed like this fox truly saw humans as part of her family. The changes kept coming, and the scientists watched with amazement as the animal's intelligence continued to grow. Some foxes began to show amazing problem-solving skills. One learned how to open the cage lock just by watching the researchers. Others came up with their own ways to get human attention, like copying the sounds made by other animals in the research center. But maybe the most surprising thing of all was how they communicated. Wild foxes aren't very vocal, and they use only a few sounds. But these foxes developed a whole language of noises that had never been heard from wild foxes. They used different sounds to greet familiar people, to ask for food, and even made special happy noises during playtime that sounded like laughter. Still, these changes weren't just a matter of training or being raised in a special way. No, the mystery was much deeper. When scientists tested their blood, they found something truly surprising. The hormone levels in these foxes were completely different from those in wild foxes. The level of stress hormones, the same ones that make us feel fear and anxiety, was much lower. And the level of serotonin, the happiness hormone, was much higher. These foxes didn't just act differently. They were different at the biochemical level. Their bodies were built from birth to see the world in a more positive way. They became calmer and more trusting. By the 1980s, the research had gone even further. The scientists made a discovery that made them rethink many ideas about evolution. It turned out that changes in behavior and appearance were linked to changes in how the foxes developed before birth. Tiny shifts in when certain genes were activated during embryo growth led to big differences in the adult animals. The clearest proof came from studying the adrenal glands, the organs that produce stress hormones. In the friendly foxes, these glands were much smaller than in wild ones. But the most amazing part? These differences could already be seen before the pups were even born. Their bodies were forming in a completely different way from the start, not just behaving differently after birth. But the biggest shock for the scientific world came with the next discovery. The friendliest foxes started to grow white spots on their fur. Not random patches or gray hairs, but special patterns, often on their faces, paws, and tail tips. And here's what's truly strange. These patterns looked exactly like the markings found on other animals that live with people. Dogs, cats, horses, cows. Where did these spots come from? Why did they look just like the fur of other domesticated animals? No one was selecting foxes based on their color. They were only choosing the friendliest ones. So what hidden connection exists between being friendly to humans and growing these white spots? The scientists were amazed. This meant that selecting for friendliness had somehow activated an ancient genetic program shared by many animal species. It was as if there was a hidden instruction in the DNA. If you become friends with humans, change your appearance like this. And in different animals, this instruction led to similar results. The foxes even started to show new fur colors that had never been seen in wild silver foxes. Some were born with brown or reddish fur instead of silver. Others had spotted patterns or unique markings. The most exciting discovery came when researchers studied their brains. They found that the cells of something called the neural crest, which affect everything from fur color to facial features, developed differently in these foxes. The scientists had basically found genetic switches that controlled both behavior and appearance at the same time. In 1991, the experiment faced its biggest threat yet when funding was suddenly cut. The money to care for the foxes ran out almost overnight. The scientists, who had dedicated decades of their lives to this project, could barely afford food for the animals. In a desperate attempt to save the experiment, the researchers took an unusual step. They began selling some of the foxes as household pets. What happened next exceeded all expectations and fully confirmed the success of the experiment. The foxes didn't just adapt to life with humans, they joined human families as easily as dogs. One family said that their fox waited by the door every day for their children to return from school, then joyfully jumped and spun in circles to greet them. Another fox learned to use a cat litter box on her own, just by watching the house cat. The most amazing story was about a fox named Pushinka. She was adopted by a family that already had dogs. What happened with Pushinka? She didn't just fit in, she started copying the dog's behavior and soon outperformed them in some ways. By watching the dogs, she quickly learned all the household rules. But then she did something incredible. She started showing protective behavior toward the young children in the family. If a stranger came too close to a child, Pushinka would stand between them and give a low warning growl. This kind of protective instinct usually takes thousands of years of breeding in dogs. The scientists made another major discovery. The cognitive development of these foxes had completely changed. As puppies, they could now understand things their wild ancestors only learned as adults, if they learned them at all. They showed understanding of human gestures by the age of just 3 weeks, earlier than wolf pups or even some breeds of dog. Even their play behavior had changed. While wild foxes usually played just to practice hunting skills, these foxes played simply for fun and connection. Just like dogs, they came up with dozens of different games to play with people. They fetched balls, played hide and seek, and even took part in simple board games by moving pieces with their paws. They could remember the names of up to 20 different toys and bring the right one when asked. By the year 2000, genetic research had reached a new level. Modern tests revealed something incredible. Belyaev's foxes had changes in more than 100 different genes. And all of this was the result of selecting for just one trait: friendliness toward humans. The scientists had accidentally discovered how choosing for a single personality trait could trigger wide-scale genetic changes in the entire body. One discovery completely stunned geneticists. These foxes had developed a version of a gene similar to the one responsible for Williams-Beuren syndrome in humans. This rare genetic condition makes people unusually friendly, trusting, and often musically gifted. Somehow, by selecting foxes for friendliness, the scientists had activated a genetic program linked to human social behavior. The intelligence of the foxes continued to grow in the most incredible ways. They no longer just understood human actions. They began to recognize human emotions with a level of accuracy that was once thought impossible for animals. When a researcher showed sadness or stress, the foxes would walk over, rest their heads on the person's knees, and softly whimper, as if trying to comfort them. Some could even tell the emotional state of different people and change their behavior to match. They were more gentle with children, more patient with the elderly, and more cautious around strangers. The foxes had mastered a skill never seen in their kind: solving problems together. When they faced challenges that confused their wild relatives, these friendly foxes showed amazing intelligence. For example, when food was placed inside a container with a complex lock, a wild fox would give up after a few tries. But the friendly foxes didn't just keep trying to open it themselves. If they failed, they turned to humans for help. They used eye contact, soft whining, and even gently pulled on people's clothes to draw attention to their problem. Even more surprising, the experiment revealed an incredible fact about lifespan. The friendly foxes lived much longer than their wild cousins. Some of them reached 15 years of age, while wild foxes usually live no more than 6 years. It was as if nature itself had rewarded these animals for forming a bond with humans by giving them extra years of life. Their vocal abilities also developed to a level never seen before. In 2019, researchers recorded an event that changed everything we thought we knew about animal communication. A fox named Vika learned to imitate her owner's laughter. And she didn't just copy the sound mechanically, she did it in the right social moment during play, showing not only vocal mimicry, but also an understanding of when it was appropriate to laugh. Some foxes even learned to make sounds that faintly resembled human words. Not real speech, of course, but voice imitation at a level that was once thought impossible for foxes. Further DNA research brought another surprise. The friendly foxes had changes in genes related to memory and learning, similar to changes seen in dogs. This explained their amazing ability to remember commands. Some of them could learn up to 100 different words and cues. They remembered the names of all family members and could find a specific person by name, even if that person was in another room. The foxes developed such an extraordinary ability to understand human body language that it seemed almost like telepathy. In experiments, they picked up even the tiniest unconscious movements, responded to micro-expressions that most people don't even notice. They could accurately find hidden objects just by following a person's gaze. One fox even learned to tell the difference between when a person pointed at something by accident and when they did it on purpose, a skill once thought to be unique to great apes. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery was about the social structure of these foxes. In the wild, foxes usually live alone, but Belyav's friendly foxes formed a complex social hierarchy, something like a wolf pack or even a human community. They had leaders, shared roles, and, incredibly for wild foxes, they helped raise each other's young. Mothers allowed other foxes to help care for their pups, something that would never happen in the wild. This experiment changed the way we understand evolution. It turned out that behavioral changes can drive physical evolution, not the other way around, as many people had always believed. By selecting friendly foxes, Belyaev triggered a cascade of genetic changes that no one could have predicted. In 2021, the latest neurobiological studies revealed that the brains of the friendly foxes were physically different from those of their wild cousins. The areas that control fear had become much smaller, while the regions that process social information had grown significantly. And here's a discovery that sounds almost like science fiction: a study of their dreams. Using modern brain monitoring equipment, scientists found that these foxes dreamed about people. More precisely, they dreamed of their daily interactions with their human caretakers. Brain activity during sleep matched the patterns seen when the foxes played with humans or received attention and affection from them. It was as if they continued bonding with their human friends even in their dreams. Another observation shocked the scientists. When the friendly foxes saw wild ones through a fence, they didn't recognize them as members of their own species. They reacted to the wild foxes as if they were unfamiliar animals, with curiosity and caution. In just 60 years, an instant in evolutionary terms, their social behavior had changed so much that they no longer identified with their wild ancestors. They had come to see humans as closer social partners than the foxes they were biologically related to. But perhaps the most surprising development was the appearance of behavior the scientists had never expected and had never selected for. Some foxes began bringing people gifts, toys, interesting objects, and sometimes even food they could have eaten themselves. This was not trained behavior. No one had taught them to do it. It happened spontaneously, as if some hidden potential in their DNA had suddenly been unlocked. These foxes had, in fact, created their own unique culture, with their own games, greeting rituals, and social rules. They invented special games that they played only with people, different from the games they played with other foxes. Some even developed preferences for specific human activities. Certain foxes enjoyed watching TV with their caretakers. Others showed a special interest in music, responding to certain melodies by gently moving their heads in rhythm. Today, more than 60 years and 50 generations later, Belyaev's experiment continues at the Institute of Cytology and Genetics in Novosibirsk. It is the longest-running genetics experiment in history. The current fox population includes domesticated individuals that behave almost like dogs, showing behaviors that once seemed impossible at the start of the project. These foxes are more than just a scientific achievement. They are living proof of how fast evolution can happen under the influence of humans. What took wolves thousands of years of natural selection, the foxes accomplished in just a few decades through targeted breeding. The results of the experiment go far beyond the story of friendly foxes. They help us understand how wild animals became companions to humans throughout history, from dogs and cats to horses and cows. Even more, this research gives us a glimpse into the possibility of creating new animal companions from species we once thought were impossible to tame. The example of Belyaev's foxes shows how quickly animals can adapt to life alongside humans, if we select them using the right traits. Many wild species that seem untamable today could potentially become our friends and helpers within just a few decades of focused effort. What's especially remarkable is how the emotional intelligence of these animals developed. In just a few years, they learned to understand human emotions, gestures, and social signals. They don't just tolerate humans near them. They actively seek out contact, understand us, and even show empathy. This suggests that the ability to bond with humans may be built into animal DNA much deeper than we ever imagined. It's possible that many wild creatures carry the genetic potential to become our friends, and that potential is just waiting to be awakened. Dmitry Belyaev passed away in 1985, but his foxes continue to teach us new things about evolution, genetics, and the nature of relationships between species. Every time one of these foxes wags its tail at a human or brings a toy as a gift, it's not just a learned behavior. It's a window into a world of possibilities. A world that opens when two species, human and animal, decide to become friends. Modern studies of these amazing creatures are still ongoing. Scientists are exploring epigenetics, the science of how outside factors can affect gene activity without changing the DNA itself. It turns out that friendliness and social behavior can turn certain genes on or off, triggering changes throughout the whole body. One of the current research directions is the possibility of using these tame foxes to help people with special needs. Some of them show an incredible sensitivity to human emotions and could serve as therapy animals for people with autism, PTSD, and other conditions. Dmitry Belyaev's experiment showed that the line between wild and domestic is much thinner than we thought. One day we may live not only with dogs and cats, but also with completely new companions. Animals we never imagined could become our friends. Maybe hidden in the genetic code of raccoons, otters, badgers, martens, wolverines, ferrets, hedgehogs, capybaras, and many others. There is a program just waiting to be unlocked. A program of friendship with humans. The story of these incredible foxes has continued for more than 60 years. And the most important lesson they've taught us is this: nature is incredibly flexible, and cooperation between species can lead to true miracles of evolution. Who knows what other discoveries still await us in the future?